every once in a while when I go somewhere, at least to like, security conferences or, different speaking events, right? People will come up and say that they love the podcast and, they really enjoy it and whatnot. And I get messages from people, saying that they love it, which is something I just really never even expected. And now, on YouTube, I have like over 75,000 subscribers, which is 75,000 more than I thought that I'd ever get.
That's awesome. Yeah, congratulations. I mean, it's a testament to the hard work and the super engaging content, and of course the amazing guests you have. I mean, I think it's really all attributed to them.
Yeah, it's probably like heavily weighted on the guests rather than anything else that I'm providing, right? I mean, it's heavily weighted. But yeah, Jake, why don't we start with your background, right? How did you get into IT? How did you kind of get into, cybersecurity? There's so much with your background that I want to like dive into. So I apologize for limiting the small talk for myself because I'm just really fascinated with your background.
No, no problem. That's the easiest thing for me to talk about. So thanks for starting there. Um, the whole reason I got into national security in general before I'd ever even heard of cybersecurity was I went to Taiwan after undergrad because I knew I liked to travel, but I didn't know really anything else about what I like to do. And wound up working at an English language newspaper there. And two things happened while I was there. One, the 2000 election happened, so I was like covering that in Taipei, really just from the AP and Reuters newswires. But got super interested in it. Became kind of had that thing that journalists often have early in their career, where it's like, oh well, I prefer to do this stuff than report on it. And at the same time, or about the same time, I was reading James Baker's book. He was the chief of staff to President Reagan, and then the Secretary of State under uh, the first George Bush. And he said, look, if you want to get national security, there's a couple ways to do it. One, you could join the military, which obviously today's Veterans Day. Thanks to all our service members for everything they've done, and a very noble profession. Um, and kind of work your way up the ranks to general or whatever, and so on. Or you could join the State Department, go stamp passports in Bangladesh for 20 years, and also a noble profession, something you could work your way up the food chain. And then he said, or you could help elect a president. And if you do that, then when you go in as a senior executive in the administration. I was like, I like that path better, just because it's faster. And so when I came back, got involved in politics and worked on the first Obama campaign, and was a deputy national field director there. Again, couldn't spell cybersecurity. Um, and they made me White House liaison to Homeland Security. And I was actually working on getting this big data sharing agreement with the European Union, or passed through the European Union. It was an agreement between the U.S. and the EU. DHS, Homeland Security, was the lead for it. And so we were the lead negotiator with the European Union on getting this thing passed. So my job was basically to whip votes in the European Parliament, the Commission, and the European Council. And we were lucky enough to get it through. It was a really fascinating project, but the team that was working on it, led by my former boss, Jane Hull Lute, who was the Deputy Cabinet Secretary at Homeland Security at the time, was hanging out after we got the thing passed, kind of celebrating at a bar in Brussels, and we're sitting there having a drink, and I think she was having a red wine and I was having a beer. I'm a very lowbrow person, and she says, "Hey, the White House has asked me to lead cybersecurity for Homeland Security, and I want you to help me do it." And I was like, "Ma'am, I can't spell cybersecurity." And she said, "That's okay. Nobody else in policy can either. Only the IT people know what it is, and no one understands what they're saying anyway. So we'll figure it out together." And so literally, that's how I got into cyber. And then from there, over time, one thing kind of leads to another, and we start off with the initial kind of mundane tasking on cyber workforce, and then that led me to work closely with Jeff Moss, and wound up getting, because I put him on the advisory board that helped us do it. That got me super involved in DEF CON. And after Hillary won, or after Hillary lost, sorry, after Trump won, um, I called up Jeff because the year before, DEF CON had gotten all this coverage because they hacked into cars for their first time. And so this was 2017, right after the 2016 election. And I remember vividly, I'm on the phone with Jeff in at San Francisco airport. So I'm going through SFO security, um, and talking to him because there's always a line, even if you have clear. And so I'm on the phone and I'm like, hey, all that, with all the press you guys got around hacking uh, cars last year, I'm like, what would be really fucking cool, that I bet you would just, blow the doors off with all the attention it would get, is what if we hacked voting machines this year at DEF CON? And Jeff was like, huh, hold on. He goes on eBay, he looks up voting machines, buys a pallet of voting machines. By the way, that make and model was currently in use at the time. I forget if that one's still in use now, but it was at the time in hundreds of jurisdictions across the country. And it's like, he goes, that's a good fucking idea. Let me call you back. So he hangs up. I fly. I have no idea what's going to happen. He calls Matt Blaze and Hari Hursty and says, hey, I know we've been talking about doing something like this for a long time. Now seems the time to do it. And so that's how the voting village started. Because I, of course, don't know what the hell I'm doing. And Hari and Matt, know all this stuff better than probably any two humans on the planet. So anyway, that's how we wound up doing the voting village. And then from there, helped Biden on the campaign, and then got made. What the hell was I? I was senior counselor to the secretary for the first couple of years. Again, oddly enough, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about this at some point, I got assigned to work on fentanyl, which, again, I couldn't spell fentanyl. They were like, hey, you're going to be the point person in the front office on this. And I'm like, I don't really care about drug policy. I don't know anything about fentanyl. And they're like, well, too bad. There's only so many people up here and you're it. So literally the first 6 months I worked on it, every time I typed the word fentanyl, a little squiggly line, red squiggly line would come under it because I literally could not spell the word the first 6 months I was working on it. And then, again, hopefully we can go into this later, but got that, me and a bunch of other people got that counter fentanyl effort stood up. And then I got detailed up to the White House to be the principal deputy national cyber director. And there I was asked, the reason that Kemba Walden, who was the director at the time, and then Rob Kanacki, who was the basically the principal deputy at the time, recruited me, was because they had just finished the national cyber strategy, and they wanted a knuckle dragger like me to come in and harass everybody who's to implement it. And so I was useless when it came to actual technical policy, but when it came to berating people and making them fulfill their what they were assigned to do in the strategy, it turns out I was actually okay at, I guess. And so that's what I did there, and then finally we started working on water security a lot at the end, and then I'll wrap up here. It's probably too long of an answer, but kind of to come full circle, Jeff and I, Moss and I, are sitting at a restaurant bar in Berlin on the margins of the Munich Security Conference back in 2024. And Jeff's like, hey, when you leave, it'd be great to have you come back to DEF CON and do something like you did with the voting village. But because we used to put out these annual reports on the policy findings, using the technical findings that came out of the village, we would then do this assessment of, okay, what's the policy implications of those findings? And Jeff was like, we should do something like that for all of DEF CON. And I was like, that's a great idea. And you have very unique information that comes out of DEF CON. A lot of people hold their best and brightest findings so they can release it at their DEF CON talk and so on, not to mention what happens in the villages. And I said, we should also do something like we tried to do in the voting village, where we asked for volunteers to help local election offices improve their security. And but in this case, maybe we should do the same thing, but for water, because of Volt Typhoon, we know the Chinese are pre-positioning malware in our water utilities. The Russians are hacking it. There's ransomware, Iranians, blah blah blah, and the government's not going to step in. And so Jeff was like, "Okay, yeah, let's do it." And so that's how we came up with Project Franklin, named after Benjamin Franklin, as you'll see with the bifocals here,
Hmm.
and the Ben Franklin here, although he's a hacker in this case, so it's purple, or blue, I think, I guess, depending on how you see colors. Uh, and so then we said, great. So we're going to use the name Benjamin Franklin, or call it Franklin, and it's because we're going to do an annual report like Ben Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac that he did every year, and this volunteer program to support water utilities, which is kind of part and parcel with one of the other important things Ben Franklin did, which was start the first ever volunteer fire brigade in America back in the 1700s, which we're now starting the first ever volunteer hacker program to support water utilities. So hence Franklin was born. I'll pause there. Probably way too much, way too long of an answer.
No, no, it's fine. It's fascinating. So tell me what it's like going into a position, at the national level, right? National advisory level. Like that's what I'll call it. I don't know a better term or whatever. Um, but going into a role in a situation at that level with having limited knowledge, of the domain, of the expertise, right? Because I ask because in cybersecurity specifically, we are we are extremely harsh with people that don't know what they're talking about, like abnormally harsh. Um, and like that's why I'm like fearing going to DEF CON and talking about my PhD because I'm sure there's going to be some genius in the crowd that's a lot smarter than me that has like three PhDs that is going to be like, oh, your math here was wrong. And it's like, okay, well, this is going off to a really good start, right? Like that's what I fear with going to DEF CON and presenting, which I'm gonna have to unfortunately get over in the next couple years here. Um, but like, what is that like? How do you ramp yourself up to be able to, then intelligently talk to people at that level, and get things done? Because, like you said, at some point in your career, you were, really engaged with ensuring that people got the work done that they were supposed to get done, and a part of that is also being able to tell when they're maybe even not telling the whole truth of getting something done, right? Like I encountered that recently, maybe not recently, but like pretty often within cybersecurity, within different organizations where, like you're the security guy and now you have to go and convince 150 developers to do something a certain way or interact with their application a certain way or code it a certain way, patch vulnerabilities, whatever it might be. And you're holding them accountable. And I'm not a dev. I am not a dev uh, at all, but I have to know it well enough to hear when someone's lying to me, right? And to know that they're lying to me and to know exactly where they're lying to me at. Like, you know, devs have devs are really smart people. And so they will throw so much stuff at you in different ways and see which sticks, which lie you buy and everything else like that, and then they'll just play it out, right? Not that they're not that they're intentionally malicious, but they have 150 hours worth of work to do it in 40 hours. And so they try to weasel their way out of, the difference there, the 110 hours, which anyone would do, right? So how do you how do you step into something like that and figure it out? I mean, that's really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things. Number one, by the way, you think the hacker community is bad, you should meet the immigration community. And
Hmm.
and that's what I started out in when I first got to Homeland Security. Oh my God, the different sides of that debate. They all say they're experts. They all hate each other. No matter what position you take, you're wrong. In particular, if you're an outsider, everything you say is wrong, even if you're right. Um, and what I what I didn't understand, or what took me several months to appreciate when I got there, I had total imposter syndrome. I mean, I graduated from Loyola, and I'm surrounded by people from the Ivy League. I'm from Nebraska. They're all from, Manhattan or Boston or wherever. All this stuff. And what I realized, I don't know, 6 months, a year into the Obama administrations, I'm like, these other people my age, my contemporaries, early 30s, whatever at the time, I was like, God, I don't think they're that much smarter than me per se. They just wake up in the morning at the ripe old age of 31 or 28 or whatever, thinking they should be writing immigration policy for the United States. Whereas I wake up in the morning hoping I don't get kicked out of all the meetings I'm going to be in today when everybody realizes I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. And so, kind of once you get over that, that makes a big difference. Number two is I cheat. I totally cheat. I like one of the first things I did at DHS was I got Jeff Moss appointed to the Homeland Security Advisory Board for the secretary, so I could call up Jeff and say, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And then I went and set up a proposed and then got approved on an advisory committee just for cybersecurity, which I picked I went to some people like Jeff and a few others, and handpicked all the people appointed them, got them appointed, and made them kind of have me to thank for their appointment to this like foo-foo, presidential advisory board. And so then I could go to them with questions and say, "Can you please tell me what we should do about X, Y, and Z?" And so on, and that persists today in my class. I teach at University of Chicago. Every week I have a speaker. And you would think it's like, oh, because the kids love it. It's like, no, because I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but all these brilliant people I have speak to my class do. So the phone a friend thing is like so important, when you're in a space where you don't know what you're doing. And then finally, I read everything. Like when I started doing fentanyl, when I started working on fentanyl, I literally read every book on cartels that I could get my hands on, every book on fentanyl I could get my hands on. Now that we do the almanac, I listen to probably at least 40 talks from DEF CON every year, just to kind of get a sense of what everybody's talking about, what's important, what's new, what's old news, what's whatever. And so just the continuous learning in life, man, that matters so much, and as you know, in so many ways, whether it be for mental health or other types of wellness and so on, or just keeping you excited about life and also being able to do your job. So anyway,
Yeah.
those are the things I used to, for better or worse.
How long did it take you to get over your imposter syndrome?
I mean, I still have it all the time.
Hmm.
I won't name names, but I get invited to these things sometimes to, be at a round table. Okay, I'll give you an example. So, in Munich, so the Munich National Security Conference is like the preeminent national security conference for all the national security leaders in the world. Like,
Huh.
literally Zelensky speaks at it,
Oh
Putin
wow.
speaks at it, Angela Merkel, Barack Obama, name your big time person across. President Xi has spoken it. I mean, like, the creme de la creme of security and foreign policy across the world. I had wanted to get invited to this thing my entire professional life. I used to offer to staff any senior person who was going to it just so I could get in and be on the margins of it, which I never got taken up on, by the way. And then when I was in the White House, I got I was able to go as a White House official, asked to speak at the Sidecar cyber conference they have as part of it, and then attended a bunch of meetings there. So I get when going to this, I had total imposter syndrome still. At the dinners I'd get invited to with all these highfalutin people that are, there was this one I was at with, the foreign minister of ex European country, the national security advisor of another, the army chief of some major African military organization, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just sitting there going, what the hell am I going to say in this meeting that all these people, are going to care about? And you do your best, and try and be authentic. And and by the way, DEF CON has been an unending well of uh, content and uh, information that I'm able to use in these types of meetings that nobody else has access to. When I'm sitting there in the Munich dinner, and I'm like, well, the village, our AI village was hacking AI that last year, and really came up with the notion that we don't really even know what red teaming is when it comes to AI. And people are like, huh, that's interesting, and it's like, I just have to survey what went on in DEF CON that year, and all of a sudden I'm the smartest guy in the room, even though I didn't come up with any of it. So um, it like I said, do your best and be authentic.
That makes a lot of sense. There's a book out there, and I can't remember the name of the book. I also did not read this book, but a good friend of mine, he read the book, and he said that I resemble like a bit of like a connector role, within I don't know,
Oh yeah,
within
yeah.
whatever
Oh my God, I
space,
know what
right?
books you're talking about.
But it
Yeah,
sounds
I'll
like
remember it. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
it sounds like you're kind of similar, right? In some ways, where you're able to pull in the right people at the right time for the right, specialty or need or whatever it might be. And I feel like that's, I mean, people would probably like hear it and be like, oh, well, Joe's talking himself up, right? Like, but it's a really valuable skill set to be able to have that. And the podcast actually allows me to leverage that, quite a bit, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, I did talk to the NVIDIA AI security expert that is like literally hacking AIs every single day. Let me go hit him up and get his thoughts on this because it's 30 seconds. I'm not going to bother him. Again, like he's one of those people where every single time I talk to him, I feel bad for speaking to him because he's literally so smart. I just feel like I'm wasting, his valuable brain energy. Um, even just speaking to him, but he always makes me feel
That happened to
fine about
me
it.
a lot at the White House,
Yeah.
especially the White House, because there's just so many incredibly smart people there. As much as we all say Washington sucks and everybody's stupid, like, they're all administrations are dealing with these incredibly hard problems. They hire, most administrations, at least, the best experts they can get their hands on, et cetera. And I definitely had the same experience as you, where, um, like the guy who oversaw our AI policy, Ben Rhodes, or not Ben Rhodes, Ben Buchanan, just
Hmm.
brilliant guy, brilliant guy. Um, and super nice, totally down to earth and everything. Um, but at the same time, you're like, well, I'm not going to go bother him for some random, you know,
Right.
whatever, article I just read that I want to ask his opinion on, because he's kind of writing AI policy for the United States right now, which in some level that's AI policy for the world, or at least a major contributing aspect of it. So I'll leave him alone. But yeah, I experience that exact same thing all the time.
Yeah. It's important to really only, make that connection or reach out when, at least for me, right? That's what I've found is that it's really important to reach out with like valuable stuff. Like it has to be like, hey, there's literally nowhere else that I can go. I'll give you an example, right? So I'm working on my PhD with deploying zero trust onto communication satellites to prepare them for post quantum encryption. Because I feel like that's where the future of cybersecurity and cyber warfare is going. And so I always like to try and get a little bit of ahead of where the market is presently to prepare myself, to kind of future proof myself, so to speak, on the job market to some extent, with that discipline. And with that, I'm talking to satellite experts, people that put, communication satellites into space because I don't know anything about satellites, like literally nothing. And even to this day, I feel like I'm pretty dumb in that area, which I'm getting my PhD in. Um, talking to quantum experts, people that have literally sent, quantum messages to and from satellites from the ground, to another satellite and back to the ground, right? And I've been trying to get a hold of the founder of Zero Trust and and sure enough, after 7 8 months of trying, I finally found a connection that was able to tie us together, to make it actually happen, right? But it's that journey, and me going to him and saying like, hey, there is literally no one else, right? Like, I Google zero trust and your name comes up. Like, that is it. It's your name. Like, I go and I ask ChatGPT and Grok and whoever, like, hey, give me the zero trust experts that I can go to. And literally, your name is the first one in the list every single time. And I say, what if I can't get him? The response every single time is, you have to get him. So it's like, they give me nine other experts, and I say, well, what if I can't get number one? And they're like, you got to get number one. Like, don't even bother with the other nine. Not to say that the other nine are not smart or intelligent or anything like that. I'm sure that they know their stuff inside and out. But it speaks volumes when it's like, hey, I'm not coming to you because like I could go to anyone else. Like, I'm coming to you because I can't go to anyone else. You know?
Right, right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, it's interesting. I feel like because I spent. I'll give you a quick rundown, of my background, right? So I got my bachelor's at UIC in criminal justice with a minor in economics and international relations, fully intended on
University of Illinois Champaign.
Chicago,
Oh,
University
University
of
of Illinois.
Illinois
Oh, yeah.
Chicago. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
Y-
Are you in Chicago right now?
yeah.
Oh, Jesus, I should have done this from your studio. I'm on the in the South Loop right now. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll definitely meet up sometime for some food and drink sometime. But
Perfect.
but yeah, I got my bachelor's in that with the full intention of going into the federal government, right? I applied to basically every agency. I told them all the same thing, like, hey, look, I'm young, dumb, I'm 22, I'm not married, I have no kids. You can throw me into the darkest hole on earth, and I will have the time of my life because this is all I've wanted to do. This is all that I know that I wanted to do, for a long time, right? And every single time I got told no, and that I had to wait until I'm 30 to go into any of these agencies. And, my rebuttal was like, hey guys, you do understand that by the time I'm 30, it's not going to be very tempting to go into the federal
Right.
government and do that work. Like, I'll probably have a family. I'll probably be making three times what you're going to pay me. Like, I'll have kids. Like, you think I want to go to, I don't know, Afghanistan or something when I have kids? Like, no, I want to stay out of that hemisphere of the earth, like that sort of thing. Um, and so like that's how I kind of like found my way into cybersecurity, because in doing that search I had some light IT background from college, and I said, okay, well, this whole process with the agencies is like 2 years, so I can't be sitting around for 2 years with student loans and not paying them. Let's go into IT and just kind of figure it out, right, until I get that thing. And the agency part never came around, and so I found myself in cybersecurity, and here I am now, kind of like quadrupling down on the industry because I love it. I love that I can pick hacking vehicles, and I can spend my entire career hacking vehicles and not know everything in that domain. Like that
Hmm.
that's what I love. It like itches some part of my brain that's like irresistible. I have to like dive into this rabbit hole and just keep going.
Yeah, I know. There's so many interesting things. Like to your point, I mean, you just walk around DEF CON, and it's like, every year there's like a new village that you're like, oh God, of course somebody's hacking that.
Yeah.
I'd never even thought of that before, but and you can kind of, go all in on satellites or vehicles or voting machines or, AI or whatever, Um, I took my daughter there for well, she's actually been there a bunch of times when she was younger, but this year she actually asked to go. And she's a teenager. I was like,
Hmm.
what? You you want to go on a trip with your father to some, like, not teeny bopper
To
concert thing.
DEF CON, the most like
Um,
degenerate cybersecurity conference on the planet.
yeah, exactly. But like she got super into a few of the things there. Like she's, loved the lock picking stuff. She got really into some of the cipher things and uh, oh, of course, the tinfoil hat thing. Although I don't know how technical that is, but anyway, and they're all just these areas that you're like, God, you could spend a whole career just on this one thing, but as most people are, you kind of get bored of stuff after a few years, and it's not like you need to leave cyber. You just go into a different aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I've told people. I know a couple of people that are like kind of burnt out from where they are in cyber. And I'm just saying, I just tell them like, well, go pick something else within cyber. Like it's not locked down to this one thing, like you can go and do whatever you want to do. Um, so I wanted to ask you, I wanted to get your opinion on the current security posture of the federal government in terms of where kind of where we sit in the world with capabilities. And this is why I asked that, because you look at nation states like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they're very offensive, right? They're very much on the offensive side. They're not shy about like even hiding that they did it. It's actually quite easy to attribute it most of the time when they did it. The last major cyber attack that I could think of that America allegedly had their hand in was Stuxnet, and that was 2014 or whatever that might have been, right? But like even then, it's pretty like it's difficult to make that attribution. It's only making that attribution based on like the skill sets and capabilities within the nation and whatnot, right? But from a cybersecurity point of view, right? I don't want to call myself an expert, but as someone that's been in the field and is experienced and whatnot, we're kind of like rolling the dice, it feels like, right? Like everyone else is kind of showing off their capabilities. Like China, pen test the electrical grid every once in a while, right? They're trying to get into the water systems every once in a while, in America. And I'm sure that we're probably doing something similar, over there. I mean, I don't know. Um, but in terms of showing of force and showing of capability and things like that, it's kind of like it's a slippery slope, but it's also a balance. And so, where do you think we're going in terms of the policy side and the actual execution of, say, a showing of force in cyberspace? Because, and I ask it because I talked to a cyber warfare officer that works for one of the intelligence agencies, and he has since completely disappeared off of the internet. Like they did a really good job of scrubbing him off of the internet after he talked to me. I'm sure he got into a lot of trouble. The episode never even went live. It'll go live next August, because it's like 5 years after we spoke. So, um, but I was talking to
You
him,
got to
and
send it to me. I'm
I'll
interested in
send
all
it
your
to you.
episodes. That one though, yeah.
I'll send it to you privately. If you want to hear it like this week. But
Love to.
yeah, I was talking to him, and from what it sounded like we have insane capability, right? One of the questions I asked him was, "Have you ever been handed a target package that you just like couldn't hack or you couldn't find a way to compromise, whatever it might have been?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, how many have you actually done? Like how many we talking here?" And he said that the number was over 200. Right, where, like, he's literally handed something, they say, "Get in, you have this time frame, do whatever you need to get in," and he gets in every single time. He said it doesn't matter where they are. It doesn't matter if they're in China, doesn't matter if they're in Iran, doesn't matter if they're in Russia, like, "I'm getting in no matter what." And he also said that that's, like, a part of the training that they go through, right? Because their training is like 2.5 years long. And I'm someone that, contemplated going into the military at one point in time. So I'm very familiar with like special forces selection and everything else like that. So it takes like 2 years, 2.5 years to train up these special forces guys, right? They spend somewhere around like $20 million training up just one guy to be in this role for hopefully the next, 10, 15 years. And for him, he said that it's basically the same, it's like the same level of difficulty, but in cyberspace. Because every single day you are handed a new package, you're handed a new task, you're hacking Wi-Fi one day, then you're hacking an Oracle server the next day, and whatever it might be, right? And if you make one mistake, one command, one line in your code that's incorrect, like you're dropped right there, right? They just ship you off that
Mm.
day, you know. So, I say all of that to try and get your thoughts on it, because I'm sure that you see it from a very different angle that, me being a little peon in the cybersecurity industry just doesn't see. But like from our point of view, it's like, man, we have a lot of capability, but if we keep on sitting around and playing, being a sitting duck, we're just going to get hacked forever, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. First off, yes, we have exquisite capability, as the folks like to say, or the cybercom like folks like to say as well. Um, and our cyber warriors are you know if not the best on the planet, I mean, we have some of the best on the planet, and our teams in general are as good or better than anybody else out there. Um, and and you know, common uh, views are that our teams are the best. And I'm, you know, that's not to downplay our adversaries and have too much confidence and think they can't get access. Obviously, they do all the time. Um, but supposedly, we have the best cyber warrior capability on the planet. Uh, I I do think that you are seeing a shift right now, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. In Biden, for example, Jen Easterly was all about shields up, defense, 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 and that was probably the most well-known um, cyber branding, effort that came out of the last 4 years. Now, the Trump administration doesn't really seem to care much about any of that stuff, but they're very into active defense, meaning, we're going to go hack you to stop you from hacking us. Which, it's not like that wasn't happening beforehand. I mean, of course it was. I think they're just putting a bigger emphasis on it, and obviously they de-emphasize CISA. Um, what being more outspoken about it, I don't know exactly what that gets us, except in the case of like Stuxnet, where we had a very real political outcome we were seeking, which was the Iranians to stop or pause their nuclear program so we could get them to the table to negotiate with us for the Iran nuke deal. And in that case, it was in our interest to get found out. Um, and because we wanted them to know that no matter what they did, they could bury their centrifuges and concrete vaults in the middle of the desert with no internet connections, for anywhere near them, like true definition of air gapped, and we'd still get in and get in repeatedly, even when they took everything out and bought all new equipment and restarted it again, and then we were right back in. And so letting them know, being letting that get out and us able to flex our muscles and show we're 10 feet tall was important because there was a political end to it. I think that Russia and China, Iran, North Korea are doing a similar thing where they're trying to flex their muscle and show that they're forces to be reckoned with. I think most of our nation state competitors view us as 10 feet tall and know we're a force to be reckoned with. So the kind of chest thumping, unless there's a specific purpose for it, like there was to get the Iranians to the table for the Iran nuke deal, um, it's not always useful at the end of the day. But there are times when, of course, it is useful, like in the Iran case, and to your point, um, for places like Iran or North Korea, for example, I think it'd probably be in our interest to show that we could shut down, their nuclear program and everything else with cyber if we wanted to. Presuming we can do that, I'm not saying we can. I haven't gotten a classified briefing on it or anything, but um, something like that could make sense. But it's the other thing we have to like weigh all this stuff with, and not to get esoteric and like pie in the sky Pollyanna bullshit, but like we're America. And I putting aside things that are going on now and however people feel about what's going on, over the last 11 months or so. Um, if we want the world to behave um, in a way that we want them to behave around ideals, around democracy, human rights, um, you know, uh, basic freedoms, stuff like that, we kind of have to walk the walk and talk the talk. And if we act like just another nation state thug walking around with a slightly bigger club than everybody else, and we're just going to beat everybody into submission. I don't know if that's like elevating, you know, um, uh, the view of the world about these ideals we're shooting for. And by the way, as Jeff Moss says all the time, so much of what we're doing is about a fight for the undecideds. The not the authoritarians and not the very entrenched, humanitarian democracies in the world, but everybody kind of in the middle, like the Turkeys of the world and others like that. Um, what are we doing to make them feel like our world is a better world to be a part of than the other guys?
Hmm.
And we kind of have. It's a pain in the ass. It's harder than it is being an authoritarian, shitbag. Um, but at the end of the day, I mean, if FDR and Churchill were right, and I think they were, you know, kind of asking nations to think about this in a bigger way and be a part of a united global community that seeks peace and so on is way more in our favor than just being the toughest kid on the block.
Hmm.
Sorry, that's way probably more than you wanted, but anyway.
No, it's interesting to get, your side of it, right? Because there like I'm not my point of view isn't always going to be like a 100% correct, representation of my opinion and what it is in the world at different levels, right? So like it's always valuable to hear everyone's opinion, in my opinion, right? Um so with Stuxnet, you were mentioning that it was a bit more advantageous for us to actually like kind of show that force, right? um which is interesting to me because I read the Kim Zader book, Zero Day on Stuxnet, right? So
Hmm.
she kind of talks about the timeline of the evolution of Stuxnet to some degree, where, in the very beginning, it was extremely, built upon being stealthy, not being able to detect it, being present, even though they rebuilt those, centrifuges and the entire facility. They ripped every wire out of the walls and everything, and it was still present, which just still blows my mind to this day that is a thing, right? um Makes me a little bit more paranoid too. But at some point in time, after actually doing it for a couple of years and not being detected, that or not that she recognized it, but the semantic researcher recognized that there was a shift in the code where it was a little bit more noisy, that it was actually like, trying to actively get out of the network and, relay different data. So, I guess my question then is, is that because in the book, and obviously you didn't write the book or anything like that, but in the book, they mention at some point in time, Israel probably got involved, and Israel's a little bit more offensive, right? They're a little bit more like out there, you know? Um, and so when they got involved, they were a little bit more aggressive. and they started to want, the data to come back, right? And it kind of left out America being a part of that decision, almost that decision tree to some extent. So it's interesting to hear you say that it was also a part, like, in our national interest, which it makes sense. It makes sense that that was a part of the national interest for, that sort of thing to become more visible, I guess, right? Um, but it's always been painted in a way that's it's like, oh well, America didn't make it to be more visible. Like, we made it to be as stealthy as possible. Someone else, some other partnering country are the ones that messed it up, right? Because I guess in cybersecurity world, that would be a failure, right? Like, you break the stealth part of your attack, like, great job, you got found out, you're done. Like, for us, it ends right there, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think I know there's been a lot of reporting that makes that point that it was just they just got caught. But if you look at what else was going on in the world at that moment, particularly about the Iran nuke deal and so on, that we were the political aims of the program. Because again, that program was not about hacking the nuclear um, uh, program of Iran per se. It was about President Bush wanting to prevent a third war with a Islamic country,
Hmm.
um, and then later, as things kind of kept going, and the Obama administration was trying to bring the Iranians to the table. Uh, that's when all this comes out, and so I disagree with a lot of the reporting that's been on this that says that it was all an accident.
Hmm.
I know that the relationship with Israel is fraught and so on, but there's real political ends to when that was found out and how and why and so on and so forth. Well, one of the ways though that I do think we can be actually achieve what you're talking about, maybe in less of a military way, in a less of a military way, is with law enforcement. And if I can, by the way, just shamelessly plug my book here for 30
Yeah,
seconds, no,
sure, yeah.
10 seconds, then, and I'll go into this thing. So I just,
Oh yeah,
Bloomsbury
we
just
didn't even
published a
talk
book.
about fentanyl yet.
Yeah, no, that's okay. We'll, I'll mention a couple cyber aspects of it right now. So Bloomsbury just published a book that I wrote called Fentanyl, Fighting the Mass Poisoning of America and the main cartel behind it. Um, and in that, you would think, I mean, as I said at the beginning of the program, I had no interest in working on fentanyl. I didn't know anything about fentanyl. I'm not a drug policy person. It's not an issue that it's ever, interested me or whatever. Um, Fentanyl, though, is very different. Most people that take fentanyl, particularly initially, don't even know they're taking it. It's laced in something else they're taking. It's far more like a mass poisoning than it is like the next crack
Hmm.
cocaine epidemic or something. Anyway, one of the things that we go into, or that I go into, is what law enforcement is doing right now with um, in cyberspace, going after uh, groups like, for example, the Silk Road folks. I mean, I think that um, uh, story is relatively well known. So when I use as kind of a starting point to talk about this, so of course that's the online drug uh, marketplace. It's like Amazon started out for drugs, then became anything you wanted. Um, Weapons, poison, all kinds of bad things, all the bad things. And it turns out that yes, the FBI was involved and so on, but also DHS was really involved. Homeland Security via HSI, which is actually part of ICE. They've been getting a lot of press these days because of everything going on. But what most people don't know is that they have a significant cyber capability, which I had no idea about, despite having worked at DHS for years, until we started this effort. And they've built capabilities over the years where they have regular kind of gumshoe law enforcement folks that train on how to hack into dark web marketplaces, how to impersonate bad guys on in these marketplaces or in other parts of the dark web and so on. So, for example, the guy at HSI who was doing the Silk Road program had gotten his way in, impersonated a another criminal, and was an actual administrator of the entire Silk Road for months or maybe even years before they took down the guy who ran it. And it that capability is somewhat nascent in law enforcement, but really could be stepped up dramatically to go after some of these criminal organizations that are out there. And what I found out when I was in the White House working on the national cyber strategy was that when you talk about transnational criminal organizations in cyber, everybody's just talking about ransomware. And what we don't do enough of is go after the big criminal organizations that are doing a host of other bad things in the country, like sell fentanyl, for example, and hack them, go after their finances, go after their money laundering, go after the individuals involved in the organization, impersonate bad guys and turn them against each other, which we do in law enforcement all the time in other capacities, and so on and so forth. And I do think that there where it's clear that you're dealing with bad guys, the cartel is you know not a good not a good organization, and they don't do good things. There isn't a gray zone really. It's just bad. um, and and we don't tout what we can do to them in cyberspace, and in fact, we don't fund a lot of the government that does have the authorities to go out and hack the Sinaloa cartel, or the Russian mob, or groups like that, and uh, and we should. And in that case, we should really flex our muscle every time we take down their crypto wallets, every time we identify who their brokers are, and you know find ways to arrest those people, and so on and so forth. That should be stuff that we're touting from the mountaintops to make all these criminal organizations think we're 10 feet tall. Well, no, particularly in relation to them, that we are 10 feet tall. Um, and that we can do to them exactly what we did to the Iranians, is get into their shorts in a way that they will never get us out. Um, and I think there's been scant attention paid to that, and I think we could achieve a lot of what you're talking about if we were to do that ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I've never thought about it from like the cartel angle. But that would actually, I mean, honestly, that would, prevent like boots on the ground, so to speak. Maybe not so to speak, but literally, and Mexico and Venezuela and wherever else the cartels are. Do you think that there's hesitancy of doing that due to potential like internal threats already present to the nation? Like potentially, like if we start, let's say, I don't know, digitally attacking one of these cartels, and they already have embedded, cartel enterprises within the United States, which it hasn't been that mainstream in the reporting, but there's been some light reporting on it where like they're finding cartel safe houses in like Montana, right, and in the mountains in
Oh yeah,
California,
all over.
like yeah. So they definitely have a presence, but do you think they're weighing that risk where it's like, all right, if we start attacking them over there, they could start launching attacks, like real attacks, physical attacks here? But I'm also thinking about the capabilities, right? So like what are their capabilities, right? So like it's not like they're going into a country like in Europe where they don't have a second amendment, like the cartel probably understands like, hey, there's 400 million Americans and there's like 500 million guns in America. The likelihood of having a grand successful attack, at least in my head, is fairly low. Like you may be able to make some progress in terms of that, like as dark as that probably sounds to say progress with that. But like eventually there's a citizen there that would do the right thing, or there's police there that would do the right thing, right? So what's your thoughts on that? Because there's a lot of different angles with it, and I'm probably not seeing them all or thinking of it.
No, it's uh, and I know just because I mean, this is what I did for
Right.
several years at DHS. Um, it's more like this hasn't occurred to anyone because it's just not how. I mean,
Mm,
for some people, like the folks I talked to who did the Silk Road um, case, and as well as ones since then, to them it occurs, or it occurs to them all the time. That's who I initially talked to about it. Uh, but for the most part, it doesn't, because law enforcement by and large is pretty kinetic. You know,
yeah.
um, there's cyber divisions, but they're, like I was saying before, they deal with cyber crime, not regular crime. The cartel is certainly particularly the Sinaloa cartel and CJNG, the other big one in Mexico, um, are becoming more cyber capable, but we don't worry about blowback as much with them as we would with doing it to like the Russians or the Chinese or
Mm,
something. So, for example, um, we launched this massive blitz against the cartel late in 23, where DEA rounded up a few dozen of their senior most lieutenants. Um, the Treasury Department did sanctions against uh, some of the Chinese chemical companies supplying them with precursor chemicals for fentanyl. State Department did a bunch of most wanted stuff to make sure their leadership couldn't travel around the world without getting arrested. And then we at DHS um, stood up this massive thing where we arrested literally a few thousand foot soldiers, several thousand pounds of fentanyl, et cetera, et cetera. And with that effort and subsequent waves of it, fentanyl deaths dropped by almost 40%, actually 30%, 37% a year later. Um, but the cartels know that for them to try and attack back in kind would would instigate exactly what they don't want, which is an actual invasion of Mexico, like military force being used, uh, to hunt them down and so on and so forth. And they know not to do this, largely from 1980s um, incident where they killed a DEA agent named Kiki Camarena,
yeah.
and and then the kind of hellfire that got rained down on them afterwards by the U.S. government. There's now kind of an unspoken rule that they don't go after Americans. They particularly don't go after law enforcement um, uh, at all. And so uh, I think that there is a lot more we could do. So, for example, the Coast Guard. The U.S. Coast Guard is both a military organization and a law enforcement organization. One of the big things that hinders law enforcement from being able to do what NSA or Cybercom does is they don't have access to the tools. I mean, they can buy stuff, but they don't have what those guys have. But Coast Guard has the authority to work on Cybercom and NSA platforms. They also can use law enforcement authorities when they're doing it because they're also a law enforcement organization. And so
Hmm,
they could, a lot of things need to be worked out, but you could have a small team of Coast Guard hackers sitting on cybercom infrastructure, targeting the cartels and really wreaking havoc in ways that we have yet to do. And part of the reason we don't do it with cybercom and NSA is because when we ask them about this, they always come back and say, "Okay, sure. What group of guys and gals do you want us to take off of hacking Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran
hmm,
to go do this?" And we're like, "Well, none." And they're like, "All right, then what are we talking about?" And so, this could there's a bunch of like bureaucratic bullshit reasons we're not doing it that could be worked out, and provide much of the shock and awe that you're talking about from a cyber perspective against these guys that are killing more Americans than Vietnam or World War II did. Fentanyl kills more people than either of those wars, not to mention 9/11. Um, and and we just haven't done it yet. So if you were to ask me where I would hope to see offensive cyber go from a federal government perspective in the coming years, I would say I'd love to see law enforcement really step up their offensive capabilities against transnational criminal organizations, particularly the Sinaloa cartel and those selling fentanyl in the U.S.
hmm. That's fascinating. I never knew that about the Coast Guard. And it's I laugh when you say that that was their response at the agencies to be like, all right, well, who do you want me to take off of these other priorities, right? Because I, we use the exact same logic,
Right.
in companies. It's like, oh, okay, that's great. You want me to do that? So that tool that we just spent $10 million on, who do you want me to take off of that one? Because I have 5 people working on it and we got 2 more years worth of work. Like
Yeah.
that's like the easiest argument to either get more funding or have people leave you alone. Like,
Yes, exactly. I know. And it was like constant, we could never get around it. We'd be like, eventually, at the end of the day, we were begging them. We were just like, look, for whatever you guys are doing in Latin America, if anything comes up against that's cartel related or fentanyl related, will you just send it to us? Because
hmm,
they would, through hacking the Chinese or the Russians or whoever, like periodically may come up upon stuff related to the cartels and fentanyl, because a lot of that stuff intersects in different places. And it was like, can we please have your scraps? How about that? You know, but we can do better. We there's ways to do better. HSI has really remarkable cyber capabilities. It's sad, like with how controversial they are right now, that they actually have probably the least or the most uh, a mission with the most public support ever, which is that they go after online child exploitation,
yeah,
so child pornography and stuff like
yeah,
that. Which, like, everybody is against that. No one is against. I mean, we even work with the Chinese and the Iranians and the North Koreans on child porn, because everybody's
yeah.
against it.
That's like the
Um,
worst of the worst.
it is the worst of the worst, right? And they've built up some amazing cyber capabilities because of that mission set over the years, that now could be used, for other things, to go after the cartels and so on. And and it isn't to the level it could be.
Hmm. It's interesting. So, okay, do you we went over time. I'm sorry about that. Do you have like 10 or 15 more
We started
minutes?
late because I had to piss, so it's fine.
Okay, so I can put half of the blame on you then. But are you good? Are you good for like another 10, 15 minutes? Because I would love to
Yeah,
dive
we'll
more
just
into
look. I
fentanyl.
think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. I always try to like stay on time, because everyone's so busy. But this is the end of my day, and my boss knows when I go live, just leave me alone. So,
Yeah,
but you're good.
yeah. We can keep going another 10, 15 minutes. Sure.
Okay. So with fentanyl,
We don't have to plug my book anymore. I'm happy to talk about it as much as you want, but I said my piece, so don't feel obligated to do that if you don't want.
oh no, I'm genuinely curious about it.
Sure.
So with fentanyl, can you talk about maybe what you found in terms of other countries' involvement with the cartels creating the fentanyl, lacing it, getting it over the border? Like, because so, this is kind of the narrative that we've been told the past couple of years is that China basically sends the precursor straight over to Latin America. They sent, a whole bunch of scientists to and chemists. And the way that they make it sound is that like, like I can't say his name, but that he like
Gene, that's right.
G basically ordered it, you know, to take place, right? Like that's like almost how it's alluded to in some ways, at least in my mind. Which I never know if it's accurate or not. Like I'm getting my PhD, I have 2 little kids. I don't have the time to like dig into stuff. Um and so that's on me, but it sounds like that's the case. What was the extent of it that you found in your own, research with it? Like, is China's government like legitimately involved in it, or is it like a Chinese cartel that's partnering with like a Latin American cartel, or what is actually going on there? Because studying criminal justice 2010 through 2014. Right, like, I think, the big drug at the time was heroin, meth, and this new thing called crocodile that basically ate the skin on whatever appendage you threw, you injected it into your body, and people were like still for some reason doing it after losing an arm and everything else, right? So like those were the big things at that time. And then fentanyl kind of like just recently like came up, right? And it almost like stoked, I feel like it stoked a whole bunch of fear in people because my daughter was born and she spent some time in the NICU, and I was like, oh, what painkiller are you gonna give her? Because she had like a chest tube in. She's totally fine now, but she had a chest tube in, and they said fentanyl. I was like, fentanyl? Like, she's a newborn. And they were like, I know, I understand. It's highly calculated. It is triple checked. Like, she's not gonna OD. Like, okay, So like that was my mentality, and I was in a hospital, right? So like what did you find through your own research and findings?
Yeah, so I guess I'll try and take these things in turn. So on the China side, uh, we looked into this extensively to see if there was a government connection. Um, and we could not find any evidence that it was directed by the government. Now, the one thing that we always said was like, man, if they're not directing it, fine. But if I was going to like lead into a war with the United States, having something like this killing the demographic that's most likely to be the folks who are going to fight in this war, meaning young, non-college educated men, um, this certainly wouldn't be a bad way to do it. So, but again, we looked and looked and looked and had, a lot of spooks and everything, um, trying to figure this out, and we could not find a connection where it was directed by the government. Um, that being said, it's China. If they wanted to shut it down, they could totally shut it down. I mean, there's lots of crime in China, but when Trump in his first term, to his credit, got Xi to agree to not allow finished fentanyl to illicitly come to the United States. I mean, it went from a uh, a waterfall of a constant flow of fentanyl to the U.S. to a trickle overnight. So in theory, they could do the same thing with the precursors going to Mexico. And to that end, I guess I wanted to put maybe an amendment on what you just said. So it's not like the precursors are flowing to Latin America. The precursors are flowing to Mexico and almost exclusively to the Sinaloa cartel.
Hmm.
Some of it goes to CJ&G, their main rival, um, but almost all of it goes to the Sinaloa cartel. And there's a couple of reasons for this because I think you were like, well, why the hell is this happening? And it's not really being driven by the Chinese; it's being driven by market demand, um, or in many ways the lack thereof, in the U.S. So the Sinaloa cartel has been around in one form or another for over 100 years. Um, they're the size of a Fortune 50 company. El Chapo, who's the famous former head of it, they thought was worth about $40 billion a year, depending on whose
Jeez.
estimates you looked at. I know he's one of the richest men in the world. Um, and uh, they had a big problem though, which was that their two main commodities that they made all their money off of was weed and coke. Well, the problem for them was we've legalized weed basically in the country, even in states where it's not legal. They're not getting it from Sinaloa; they're getting it from the next door state where it is. And two, um, cocaine, which used to be super popular, like about 6.7% of the population, 6, 7. I can't say those two word numbers without doing that because of my kids. Anyway, 6.7% of the population in 1985, at the height of cocaine, said they had done fentanyl in the last month. Today, that number's down to 0.3%.
Oh,
0.3%, not even 1% of the population has said they do cocaine last month. So it's like if you're McDonald's and all of a sudden French fries and Big Macs are not popular anymore, like what the hell do you do? So, and there's no bailouts for, narco, narco tycoons. Um, so they adjusted, and in the span of just 10 years, they did two things. They took over the migration trade, so you cannot cross the southwest border of the United States without paying off Sinaloa or CJ&G, and that was considered like a dirty business for them. They never got involved. It was other other folks who did that. Um, and and then two, they got involved in these um, other designer drugs like meth initially, and then fentanyl. And what they liked about fentanyl was that it was super addictive and super cheap. So they could cut their, and unlike meth, it wasn't a speedy drug. It was like more of like a drug that made you high. So they could cut their coke and their heroin with it, and increase their profits. But heroin has never been that popular, and coke was less popular. So they needed to do something else. And this all coincided with about the time that we were weaning everybody off Oxycontin and Vicodin and all the prescription opioids, that that epidemic started in the 2000s, 2010s. So some industrious guy, gal, whatever, um, in the Sinaloa cartel, presumably, figured out like, oh, well, I could make fake OxyContin pills and put fentanyl in them. Part of the reason the cartel was never in the illicit prescription drug market is they're not Pfizer. They don't have massive facilities to build or to make fake prescription drugs. But once you've got fentanyl, all you need is a pill press, to make your drug look like OxyContin or Tramadol or Xanax or Adderall or whatever, and now you're in business. And we had a whole operation at Homeland Security, by the way, that just sought to find the pill presses, that were going from China to the cartel and
Wow.
confiscate those so they couldn't make fentanyl look like these other drugs. Once they got into the illicit prescription drug market, Sally barred the door. It was like, didn't matter that they were killing all these people because they were all net new customers, that never would have done coke or heroin in the past. So they didn't care about all the people they were killing off. I mean, they didn't care about that to begin with, but it wasn't like it was killing their customer base, their reliable customer base, like the other stuff. And it opened up this massive new market to them. And all of a sudden now it becomes, one of their main lines of effort is is basically poisoning Americans. Because again, almost nobody's looking for fentanyl. In fact, most people who use drugs, um, are avoidant like the plague. They have all these ways of trying to not take it. Um, and so that's kind of how it happened. It was really because the Sinaloa cartel, needed to make up a massive nut because they lost so much money off weed and coke.
Huh.
Yeah, I remember
Wow.
when this was like laid out to me and a bunch of agents and intel people and military folks and so on in this one conference room, because we all would sit there and be like, "Why are they doing this? They're killing off their own users."
Right.
Um, and then when this was all explained and we understood how it got them into the illicit, prescription drug market with all these other users, we are just like, "Fuck!" Like this makes business sense for them. Once it makes business sense for them, man, it's it's so hard to stop.
Yeah. I mean, they're
In fact, we
basically
had
a
a point
business
where the head of
enterprise.
the yeah, where we had the head of their Department of Justice, this guy Gertz, who basically says to us in a meeting like, once the precursors are here in Mexico, game over. Like we just can't,
Huh.
they can't find it fast enough. We can't stop the finished drugs from getting here, et cetera, et cetera. Which is part of the reason why I think the cyber component to this is so important. It's like so much of those deals are being done online,
Mhm.
that if we had more offensive cyber capability going after the Chinese brokers, going after the chemical companies, going after the money laundering and other stuff the cartel is doing, we could get after this way upstream from where we are now.
That's essentially the only way to do it without invading, right? I mean, and that's the only way to stop that operation without actually boots on the ground. You disrupt it from a cyber perspective, you just infiltrate every digital avenue of their business, and you cause so much pain for them that it's like, okay, we're either going to get our defenses up or we're going to stop doing this, and it'll be a whole lot easier for them to just stop doing it.
Yeah, I mean that was my whole point then and now with everything going on with Latin America. It's like, no one will ever end criminality. No president, no party, no country, nobody will ever end criminality. As
Right.
long as humans have been alive, criminality has been alive. I mean, hell, it's alive in the animal kingdom, you know. Um, uh, but we could end fentanyl, and you just have to raise the pressure so much on this one thing that's killing so many people, 10 times more than any other drug, that they're like, you know what, it's just not worth it. Forget it. We'll go back to doing other bad things, just not that one. And I think, we may be in a position right now that is very much the position Bush was in, where he was like, I don't want to go to war with yet a third country. Give me other options. And they come back to him with the cyber option, and that was the most viable. And I do think that extraordinary measures should be taken to stop fentanyl. I would not like us to see us invade Mexico, of course, but the cyber option may be the kind of not panacea, but the broad approach that could, infiltrate every aspect of the cartel that is yet gone unused, in any real sense, in any ubiquitous sense as it relates to the cartel, that could really, um, degrade and disrupt their operations such that they stop. I mean, after we launched that big Blue Lotus campaign that I mentioned, where we, arrested thousands of people, the DA did their thing, and state and treasury and blah blah. A few months later, they literally hung decapitated bodies from some of the main overpasses in
Hmm.
Juarez. I forget which city. I think it was Juarez. And these big sheets written on, and on the sheet said, these are the bodies of the people who were overseeing fentanyl distribution in the United States. Like anybody else who starts this has the same fate coming towards them. Now, a lot of my law
Jeez.
enforcement guys are like, yeah, they use our attacks as ways to go take out their rivals all the time. But the point is, what they don't normally do is come out and say, hey, the gringos came after us and we're so concerned about this that we're going to do this mea culpa, even if it does wind up being somewhat of a bullshit mea culpa. Like that does not happen. So, I mean, we've had an impact on them. I'm sure with the current administration who's picked up a lot of where we left off and has done a lot much more in many respects, um, is getting similar responses. But I think that turning up the heat on one specific thing they do is the way to get them to stop doing it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. So I have one final question, before we end this super long podcast. But during your time in the government, the Edward Snowden leaks like came out, and he fled to
Yeah.
several different countries, ended up in Russia. At that time, I was actually really actively trying to go into the federal government. And so I had different, I don't want to call them sources, but I had good friends that were in different positions within the government that were saying that essentially the only way that he was allowed to stay, in China for the couple weeks that he did was that he basically sold them, everything that he knew, like lists of, operatives in the country and everything else, right? And then he would go on to another place, do the same thing, end up in Russia, and for some reason, Russia still has him there, right? Is there any truth to that, to your knowledge? Because I ask because that is something that has never really been told or mentioned. And the movie, it's weird, right? The movie, the book, everything like that paints him as being someone that couldn't report something within the government because no one would listen to him, and so he like took it upon himself as some righteous warrior to go and flee the country and tell everyone about this thing. But still, like, there's approved methods of reporting things, and if you weren't comfortable with it, you didn't have to work on it. And like, there's literal councils where you report something that you don't believe in, it gets thoroughly reviewed, and sometimes it gets shut down, and sometimes approval comes through to keep it going because of the value that it provides, right? And that is something that, working with the federal government, that you just have to live with. Like, that's
Hmm.
literally something that they drill into you in the interview process. I've experienced it myself, is like, hey, it's not up to you to make this decision, it's up to someone else to make that decision. You're supposed to live with it. If you can't live with it, you could work at a different office. You could switch agencies. You could do all these other things, like all that stuff. Like they give you all of those resources. So, is there any truth to him selling, basically maybe not secrets necessarily, but like people who we had in the country that, for instance, China may have not known that we had in the country in a certain capacity and whatnot? Do you know anything about that? Don't say anything classified. So,
No, I wouldn't. Um, so, I mean, look, I'd have, I describe somewhat more credence to the claim that he was doing this all, with positive intent throughout. I think at the beginning he probably started with positive intent. Um, but the idea that he was doing, I would have a lot more sympathy for that, for the idea that it was positive throughout, if he was like hiding out at the Vatican or something and getting
right.
political asylum there, as opposed to Russia. You know,
Yeah, or like if
um,
you went to Europe, like it's like,
yeah, right,
okay, you're not trying to do
yeah,
something you're not necessarily supposed to do.
yeah. I think that the the theory that I have heard from very reliable people that I subscribe to, and I believe is in the press, as may not in the movie, I don't think, but in the press, is that he started out thinking he was doing the right thing. He thought that there was this grave injustice that was happening, blah blah. You know, rightly or wrongly, people have their own opinions on it, whatever. And he was like, "I'm going to be a whistleblower." And at some point in the, what can be a noble thing, being a whistleblower if the government's wrong is a good thing to be. I mean, thank God for the thousands of whistleblowers throughout history that have stopped governments from doing bad things. Um, but but at some point in the process of, he went from whistleblower to asset that was being ran by, we believe, the Russians. Um, Maybe there was a Chinese component to it, particularly as you're referring to, when he had the time that he spent, I believe, in Hong Kong, before he made his way to Russia. And however it started, where it wound up was he was essentially selling secrets to, at the very least, the Russians, probably the Chinese, because he had to go through China to get there. I don't know of anybody else he may have sold them to, but at least those two countries are kind of what I believe common knowledge is among kind of the national security, you know, establishment.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so crazy, because like that part is never talked about. And I remember being in one of my classes and the professor like sparks a debate about the legality of Edward Snowden and what he's doing and I I like had the class in an uproar pretty quickly because I was the only one in the class where it was like, yeah, what he did was wrong, like straight up, full blown, it was just wrong, plain and simple. And like people were just like going off on me, and the professor is a lawyer for the SEC, and she's like the only one that basically wasn't attacking me, because it's like this guy made it to China and then left China. So that implies that he had a deal previously set up with another entity to get him to China and then through China, because China would never ever let him leave China as soon as he gets there and they find out what he has and what he knows, what he did. Never would they let him leave. That would be the biggest intelligence failure in the history of the world if China were to ever let him leave under any other pretense. And then he magically finds his way to Russia and Russia welcomes him in. Like, it's like, come on, guys. Like, there's obviously something we're not being told here. Like, we're not going to know everything in the government. So that was my whole, kind of experience with it. And also, he decided to get caught while I was on the plane to Germany, and like the fact that like we were spying on Germany at the time was released while I was on the plane, and I get into customs and they like wanted to hold me there for 2 hours. Like it was crazy because they thought like I was going to do something. Like, guys, I'm literally in college. Like, go check my transcripts.
Yeah, oh, I can tell you, like, now when I go to Russia or China, I mean, I haven't been to Russia in years, as you can imagine. But even the last time I was there, in the early days of Obama, when supposedly we were resetting, the relationship and everything. I mean, I was followed everywhere. I mean, there were like,
Yeah.
they, as you can imagine, they were all over all my devices and everything else. And in China, God, when we did the first DEF CON China, I remember Jeff and I sitting there, a few other people laughing because the surveillance was so ridiculous that like there'd be guys like in the bushes, but the bushes barely went up to their waist, and they'd be sitting there with these huge cameras taking pictures of us and recording what we were
Oh my
saying,
God.
and we're all just like, I mean, we're right here. I mean, you could just go sit at the next table. I mean, it's no different than what you're basically doing right now. The surveillance was just so oppressive. Um,
It's like, just give me
but
your
yeah, I
recorder.
mean,
I'll put it in my pocket. Like it's,
yeah, right, exactly, exactly. But I mean, to your point, I remember. I mean, I was somewhat of an I wasn't somewhat. I was very much a novice, um, national security person at the time, and I remember saying to this kind of taking the conversation full circle, saying to Jane Lute, the woman who brought me into cyber, former deputy secretary of DHS, I was like, Jane, I don't understand what's going on. Why haven't we just killed this guy? Don't I mean, shouldn't his car just driven off a bridge or something at this point? Like, why is this even? And she's like, because we're America. That's why. Like, and he's a U.S. citizen. Like, we just don't do that stuff. Whereas you look cross-eyed at Putin, and all of a sudden there's arsenic in your coffee. Even if you live in Peru. Not to
yeah.
mention London, where they actually did that.
Don't
Um,
decide to run against them in a political election.
Yeah, right, exactly. And look, don't get me wrong, we do bad things, and we've done a lot of bad things over the years. But you know, because we actually do care about human rights and freedom and rule of law and so on, that guy's able to still be alive in Russia today, and every once in a while pop up and do a PSA for the Kremlin on how
Yeah.
bad America is. So
Right.
you know. I'll tell you one thing: if he was Russian or Chinese, um, he would
He would have been
he would not be
disappeared.
with us. He would not
Yeah.
be with us today.
He'd definitely be disappeared.
Yes, yes.
Well, Jake, it's been a fantastic conversation. Absolutely fascinating. I feel like I could talk to you for another 2 hours. So we're 100%, going to go grab lunch or drink sometime, and definitely talk a bit more. I'm sure I'll have you back on the podcast as well.
Well, I'd love to do it. It's been great talking to you too. It's funny, my staffer was like, "Oh, you got make sure you prep for this." I'm like, "This is about DEF CON stuff. I can talk about this
Yeah.
forever. It's like the thing I like talking about." So hopefully I didn't ramble on too much, and definitely look forward to getting a drink here in Chicago someday, and hopefully at DEF CON this summer.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we'll definitely be in touch. But before I let you go, how about you tell my audience, where they could find you if they wanted to connect with you, and where they could find your book?
Great. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's my main area that I am. Just my name, Jake Braun. And you can get my book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc. It's called Fentanyl: The Mass Poisoning of no, Fentanyl: The Mass Poisoning of America and the Cartel Behind it.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Well, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoy.